His wife, the woman he promised to love for eternity, was dying on an operating table just 20 ft away. Her screams had just faded into a terrifying silence. But David Harris wasn't alone in the hallway. His mistress, Khloe, stood beside him, and as the doctor approached with a face like stone, Khloe let out a quiet, sharp laugh. She had won. The obstacle was gone. David was hers. The doctor looked past David, her eyes boring into the mistress, and whispered the 4 words that would turn Khloe's victory into her own personal hell. "We saved the babies. It's twins." The house in Terrytown, Austin, was a monument to good taste. David Harris, a man whose architectural firm was redefining the city skyline, had designed it himself. It was all glass, warm limestone, and clean lines overlooking a verdant swell of the Colorado River. His wife, Sarah Jenkins Harris, had filled it with life. Sarah, a respected art curator, had a warmth that softened David's sharp edges. Their life was by all accounts perfect, except for the silence. For 7 years the house had been quiet. It was a silence punctuated by timed injections, devastating negative pregnancy tests, and the quiet, sterile grief of infertility. They had poured a small fortune into Austin IVF, and their marriage, once a passionate partnership, had become a shared, grueling project. Then, on their 8th try, it worked. Sarah was now 38 weeks pregnant, radiant and heavy with their miracle. The silence was finally gone, replaced by the assembly of a crib, the painting of a nursery, a soft, hopeful sage green, and endless joyful debates over a single name: Oliver. On this last perfect Sunday, Sarah was arranging tiny hand-knitted booties on a shelf. David watched her from the doorway, a knot of something dark and heavy in his stomach. He loved her. God, he loved her. He loved the way she hummed when she was happy, the gentle curve of her spine as she bent over her work. He loved this baby, their baby, with a fierce protective instinct. But he was also a coward. "The new schematic for the 6th Street Tower is a nightmare," he said, loosening his collar. "I'm going to have to pull an all-nighter at the office." Sarah turned her smile only slightly dimmed. "Oh, David again? That's the 3rd time this week." I know, it's just this project. It's make or break. Once this is done, I'm all yours, I promise." He crossed the room, kissed her forehead, and placed a hand on the taut drum of her belly. "And yours, Oliver." The baby kicked as if in protest. Sarah covered his hand with hers. "Okay, just be careful. I love you." "I love you too," David whispered. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. He didn't drive to the downtown office. He drove to a sleek, impersonal condo building on South Congress. He took the elevator to the 14th floor. The door opened before he could knock. Khloe Sanders didn't wait for him to step inside. She pulled him in by his tie, her mouth finding his. She was all sharp angles, expensive perfume, and thrilling, dangerous ambition. Khloe was a new associate at his firm, 28 years old, and saw David not as a man, but as a prize. "You're late," she murmured against his lips. She was organizing the nursery, he said, his guilt returning. Khloe rolled her eyes, pulling away to pour 2 glasses of wine. "The nursery? How sweet. Did you tell her you're not going to be there to see it? That you're going to be with me?" "Khloe, we talked about this. It's complicated. The baby is coming." "The baby?" She scoffed, handing him the glass. "That's all she has." "I have you. Your mind, your ambition, your future. She's your past, David. A bloated, sentimental past. You know you can't stay. Once the kid is born, you have to choose." He knew she was right. He had to choose. But as he looked at Khloe so fierce and uncompromising, he felt a different kind of trap closing in. The affair, which had started as a reckless escape from the sterile, scheduled world of IVF, had become a second parallel life, and it was a life that was demanding he burned the first one to the ground. "Just not tonight, Khloe. Let's not talk about her tonight," he said, setting the wine down. She smiled, a slow, predatory curving of her lips. "Fine, let's not talk at all." As he fell into her, he forced the image of the sage-green nursery and the tiny hand-knitted booties from his mind. He was a man living two lives, and he was about to find out in the most brutal way possible that you can't build a new life on a foundation of lies. The entire structure was about to come crashing down. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in deception. David Harris moved through his perfect home like a ghost, his body present, his mind 1,000 miles away at a condo on South Congress. He was attentive to Sarah, rubbing her swollen feet, fetching her ice chips, telling her how beautiful she was, and every word of it was true, which only made the lies he told Khloe feel more poisonous. To Khloe, he was the trapped husband, counting the seconds until he could be free. He was building a fantasy with her, a future in a penthouse, trips to Milan, a life unburdened by the domesticity that he claimed was suffocating him. He was two different men, and the strain was making him crack. Sarah, for all her focus on the baby, was not a fool. She had built a career on noticing the details. Others missed the subtle shift in a painter's brush stroke, the hidden meaning in a line, and she saw the changes in David. It wasn't one big thing. It was 1,000 tiny, unraveling threads. It was the way he now showered the moment he came home from working late, when he used to just collapse on the sofa with her. It was the scent of a perfume on his suit jacket. Not hers. Something sharper, musky. Santal 33. It was the ping of his phone, which he now kept face down on the nightstand at 2 a.m. The final thread was an American Express bill. He'd left it on his desk, an oversight born of arrogance. Sarah was looking for a stamp. She saw the charge. Uchi, $480. On a Tuesday night, he had supposedly been eating stale pizza with his draft team. She didn't cry. The shock was too cold for that. She simply sat in his leather office chair, the white rectangle of paper trembling in her hand, and waited for him to come home. He walked in at 7:00 p.m., all smiles, holding a bouquet of Sarah's favorite white poise. "For my two favorite people," he said, leaning in to kiss her. Sarah turned her head. He kissed the air. "What's wrong?" he asked, his smile faltering. She held up the receipt. "How was the spicy tuna?" David's blood ran cold. The color drained from his face. There was no lie big enough to cover this. "Sarah, I can explain. Can you?" Her voice was quiet, but it was the most dangerous sound he had ever heard. "Can you explain the perfume? Can you explain the 2 a.m. text messages? Can you explain, David, how you could do this to me? To us now?" She gestured to her stomach, her hand shaking. It just happened." He stammered, the peonies hanging limply from his hand. "It's this woman at work, Khloe Sanders." "It doesn't mean anything, Sarah. I swear it's been so hard, the IVF, everything." "Don't!" she hissed. And now the tears came hot and angry. "Don't you dare use our son as an excuse for this. You think it's been hard for you? I'm the one who's been pumped full of hormones, who's had my body poked and prodded for 7 years. I'm the one carrying this child, and you go find someone new." He had no defense. He just stood there as her grief and rage washed over him. "Who is she?" Sarah finally whispered, wiping her face. "It doesn't matter. It's over. I'll end it tonight. I'll fire her. Sarah, please, look at me. I love you. This baby is my world." Sarah stared at him for a long, agonizing minute. He saw the calculation in her eyes. She was weighing 7 years of love against 1 night of definitive proof. "I don't believe you," she said finally, her voice flat. "I don't believe it's over. But here is what's going to happen. You are going to stop. You are going to delete her number. You are going to end this, and you are going to be here for the birth of your son. We are not going to talk about this again until Oliver is home and safe. I will not bring this child into a broken home. Do you understand me, David? It was more than he deserved. It was a lifeline. He grabbed it. Yes, he said, sinking to his knees, pressing his face to her stomach. Yes, Sarah, anything. It's over, I promise, it's over. But as he held his weeping wife, his phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from Khloe. Thinking of you. Can't wait for tonight. David Harris, the brilliant architect, the coward, the liar, did the one thing he knew how to do. He silenced his phone and held his wife tighter, trapping the lie between them. He didn't end it. He just got better at hiding it. He told Khloe that Sarah was suspicious and that he had to be careful for a few weeks, which only made their stolen moments more illicit, more thrilling for her. Khloe, in her predatory confidence, was fine with this. She knew she had him. It was just a matter of time. Sarah, meanwhile, retreated. She focused on the baby. She stopped asking David where he was. She simply watched the clock, her eyes hollow, and prayed that her family, which hadn't even officially begun, could survive its first mortal wound. The week of Sarah's due date, a heavy, humid stillness settled over Austin. The air was thick, charged with the promise of a storm. It was a perfect mirror for the atmosphere inside the glass house in Terrytown. Sarah was on edge, not just from the pregnancy, but from the palpable tension. David was a caricature of a devoted husband, a man playing a role so hard it was painful to watch. He was home every night by 6 phone-placed screen up on the counter, but his eyes were distant, and he jumped every time the doorbell rang. The confrontation had changed nothing except to make the silence between them heavier. On Tuesday, Sarah had her 39-week checkup. David had a critical meeting he couldn't miss. It's with the city council, babe. I have to be there. I'll be there for the main event, I promise. It's fine, David, Sarah said, tying her sneakers, her feet so swollen she could barely see them. My mother is taking me. Her mother, Margaret Jenkins, was a woman cut from stern Texas granite. She had never fully trusted David, finding his charm too polished, his ambition too sharp. She arrived in her practical Volvo, took one look at her daughter, and her lips thinned. You look exhausted, Sarah. He's not helping, is he? He's busy, Mom. The 6th Street Tower. Right. The tower, Margaret said the word, dripping with disbelief. At the clinic, Dr. Evelyn Miller, a brisk, brilliant OB-GYN who had guided them through the entire IVF journey, entered the exam room. Her normal, cheerful demeanor was gone. Sarah Margaret, let's get your blood pressure. The cuff hissed. Dr. Miller looked at the reading. She took it again. Sarah, she said, her voice calm but firm, your pressure is 180/110. That's dangerously high. What? But I feel okay, just tired. That's the scary thing about preeclampsia. I'm also seeing protein in your urine sample. We need to get you to the hospital now. We're not waiting for labor. We're inducing you today. A jolt of panic, cold and electric, shot through Sarah. Today. But David, he's in a meeting. Call him, Dr. Miller said, already pulling off her gloves and typing into her tablet. I'm admitting you to St. David's Medical Center. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. Margaret was already on the phone, her face grim. David, it's Margaret. Sarah's in trouble. Preeclampsia. They're inducing her now at St. David's. David was in fact in a meeting, but it wasn't with the city council. It was in a dark, plush booth at the W Hotel bar, his leg pressed against Khloe's. They were drinking champagne, celebrating the hypothetical future where he was free. His phone buzzed. Margaret Jenkins. He winced and silenced it. Who's that? Khloe asked, tracing the rim of her glass. No one, just work. The phone buzzed again. Margaret Jenkins. He silenced it again. You're a terrible liar, David. Khloe purred. It's her, isn't it? Before he could answer, the phone buzzed a third time. Sarah. His heart hammered. Sarah never called him when she was with her mother. He picked it up. Sarah, is everything okay, David? It was Margaret's voice, sharp with terror. I'm driving her. She's God. David, she says she can't see properly. Her vision is blurred. Get to the hospital. St. David's now. The line went dead. The blood drained from David's face. Blurred vision. High blood pressure. He'd read the pamphlets. This was bad. This was red alert bad. I have to go, he said, throwing cash on the table. What? Khloe's face twisted in rage. You're kidding me. She's faking it, David. It's a ploy to get you back. She's not faking. He snapped his voice raw with a sudden real fear. She's at the hospital. It's the baby. It's happening. He ran from the bar, leaving Khloe sitting alone in the booth. She sat there for a full minute, the champagne tasting sour. He had left her. When it came down to it, when the real thing happened, he ran back to his wife. He chose her. A cold, narcissistic fury, deeper and more potent than any she had ever felt, settled over her. She was not a woman to be discarded. She was not the other woman. She was the main woman, and she was going to prove it. She pulled out her phone and called an Uber. St. David's Medical Center, she told the driver, her voice perfectly calm. And please drive quickly. It's an emergency. She was going to the hospital. She was going to find David. She was going to force the choice right then and there. She would not be hidden. She would not be ignored. The storm had finally broken, and Khloe Sanders intended to be the one left standing when the floodwaters receded. The maternity ward at St. David's was a place of frantic, controlled chaos. When Margaret's Volvo screeched to a halt at the emergency entrance, Sarah was barely conscious. A team was waiting. They rushed her to a labor and delivery room, alarms already beeping. Dr. Evelyn Miller was there, scrubbed and focused. She's in severe pre-eclampsia, bordering on eclampsia, she snapped to the nurses. Get me a magnesium sulfate drip now and prep for an emergency C-section. She's crashing. This isn't just pre-eclampsia. I think it's HELP syndrome. HELPy syndrome. The acronym was a death sentence. Hemolysis. Elevated liver enzymes. Low platelet count. It was the body's ultimate betrayal. A catastrophic failure of its systems in response to pregnancy. David sprinted through the automatic doors, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. He found the maternity floor and saw Margaret, pale and trembling outside L&D room 3. Where is she? Is she okay? They took her, Margaret whispered, her eyes burning with hatred. They're trying to stabilize her, her liver, her platelets. Oh God, David. She dissolved into sobs. A nurse, Brenda, a kind woman with weary eyes, stepped out. Mr. Harris, your wife is asking for you. David pushed past Margaret and into the room. It was like a war zone. Machines shrieked, and Sarah, his beautiful, warm Sarah, was unrecognizable. She was swollen, her skin a sickly pale, and her eyes were wild with terror. David, she cried, grabbing his hand with a strength he didn't know she possessed. I can't feel my hands. I'm so scared. David, the baby, just save our baby. Promise me. Save Oliver. I promise. I promise. He sobbed, kissing her clammy forehead. We're both right here. We love you. Mr. Harris, you need to step out. We're taking her to the O now. Dr. Miller commanded her voice, leaving no room for argument. They wheeled Sarah out. David stumbled back into the hallway, his legs giving out. He collapsed onto a cold plastic waiting room chair, his head in his hands. He was a fraud. His wife was dying, and the last coherent thing he had done was lie to her. Mr. Harris. He looked up. His blood turned to ice. Khloe Sanders was standing in front of him. She was wearing a black silk blouse and leather pants, looking utterly out of place like a vulture in a dove's nest. "Khloe," he whispered, horrified. "What? What are you doing here? You can't be here." "I can't," she said, her voice dangerously low. "You ran out on me, David. You left me in that bar like I was nothing. I'm not nothing, David. I'm your future." Khloe gestured contemptuously toward the O doors. "Is your past. I'm here to make sure you remember that. Get out," David hissed, jumping to his feet. He grabbed her arm, trying to pull her toward the elevators. "This is a hospital. Your wife is dying." Khloe's voice rose, turning heads at the nurse's station. Nurse Brenda's eyes widened. "And you know what? It's for the best. She's weak. She was holding you back. Now you and I can finally be together. You and me." And she paused, a strange, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She had been saving this. This was her ace. "And our baby," Khloe said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. David froze. "What?" "I'm pregnant, David. 10 weeks. I was going to tell you tonight over champagne. Congratulations, Daddy. It looks like you're going to be a father after all." The world tilted. Pregnant. Khloe was pregnant. His wife was on an operating table fighting for her life, and the life of their son, and his mistress was here telling him she was also pregnant. It was a nightmare. It was a hell of his own making. "Khloe, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly. You're mine. That thing in there is just a complication, and complications," she said, her eyes glinting, "can be removed." "You're a monster," David breathed, recoiling from her. "I'm a survivor," she corrected, "and I'm not leaving. I'm going to wait right here for the good news." Before David could respond, before he could physically throw her out of the hospital, the doors to the operating hallway swung open. Nurse Brenda was walking quickly toward Dr. Miller, who was at the scrub sink. "Doctor," Brenda said, her voice low but urgent. "That woman in the hall, the one in the black blouse, she was just screaming at Mr. Harris. She said that thing in there is just a complication and that she's pregnant with his baby." Dr. Miller stopped scrubbing. She slowly turned her eyes over the top of her surgical mask, hardening into chips of ice. She had just seen Sarah Harris's platelet count. She knew what was happening. She had seen this kind of tragedy before, but the cruelty in the waiting room was a new, horrifying variable. "Keep her away from L&D, Dr. Miller ordered. "Call security if you have to and get Mr. Harris back in here. He needs to prepare himself." The battle in the O was failing. The war in the waiting room was just beginning. Time dissolved into a thick, syrupy dread. David sat on one side of the waiting room near the O doors, his body vibrating with guilt and fear. Khloe, defiant, had taken a seat on the far side by the elevators, casually scrolling through her phone as if she were waiting for a table at a restaurant. Margaret had gone to the chapel, unable to bear the sterile, terrifying proximity to the operating room. David prayed. He prayed to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. He prayed for Sarah. He prayed for Oliver. He prayed for this nightmare to end, for the clock to rewind, for a chance to undo the last 6 months of his life. An hour passed, then 2. The atmosphere on the floor shifted. Nurses moved with a new grim urgency. David heard a code blue paged over the intercom, followed by L&D operating room 2, Sarah's room. He shot to his feet. A nurse gently pushed him back. "Sir, please wait." He watched helpless as the crash cart was slammed through the doors. He heard a new level of frantic shouted commands from inside, and then a sound that would haunt him forever. A long, single, continuous beep, the sound of a flat line. Khloe looked up from her phone, a flicker of interest in her eyes. She saw David's white-knuckled grip on the chair. She saw the panic. She saw the tears streaming down his face, and then the O-doors opened. Dr. Evelyn Miller walked out. She was no longer a surgeon. She was an executioner. She had stripped off her bloody gloves and her scrub cap. Her short gray hair was matted with sweat. Her face was a mask of profound professional grief. She walked directly to David. He already knew. He was already shaking his head. No. Mr. Harris, David. Dr. Miller's voice was low, tired. We did everything we could. Sarah's HELP syndrome was catastrophic. Her liver failed. She developed DIAC. She was bleeding from everywhere. We couldn't stop it. We gave her 30 units of blood, but she threw a massive embolism. The doctor took a deep breath. I'm so sorry. We lost her. Sarah, she's gone. David Harris shattered. A sound left his body that wasn't human. It was a raw animal wail of pure agony. He collapsed his body, folding in on itself, his hands clawing at his face. He had killed her. His lies, his stress, his betrayal. He had killed her. And from across the waiting room came another sound. A laugh. It was quiet, sharp, and utterly unmistakable. A single triumphant bark. David's head snapped up. Khloe was standing now, a hand partially covering her mouth, but her eyes were dancing with victory. She had won. The wife was dead. The obstacle was gone. David was grieving, yes, but he would get over it. He was hers. All of him. And his fortune. She walked over her heels, clicking on the linoleum, her face a perfect false mask of sympathy. Oh, David, darling, I'm so terribly sorry for your loss. What a tragedy. David, in his shock and grief, could only stare at her. Dr. Miller's eyes, which had been fixed on David, slowly swiveled to Khloe. She recognized her instantly, the woman from the hallway. The complication. Her gaze was so cold, so filled with contempt it could have frozen fire. Khloe's smirk faltered under the weight of it. Mr. Harris, Dr. Miller said, her voice suddenly sharp, deliberately cutting through Khloe's performance. She did not take her eyes off the mistress. Mr. Harris, we couldn't save Sarah, she paused, but we saved the babies. David's head, buried in his hands, came up slowly. What? Babies? No, it's a boy, Oliver. Dr. Miller finally turned her gaze back to David, and for the first time, a flicker of softness entered her eyes. It was a surprise, she said, her voice gentle, but loud enough for Khloe to hear every word. One baby was positioned directly behind the other on every ultrasound. It's rare, but it happens. We didn't know until we got in. She knelt, putting a hand on David's shoulder. You have a son, David. He's tiny, but he's a fighter. And you have a daughter. It's twins. The 4 words hit the air. It's twins. Khloe's face, which had been alight with triumph, went utterly, dreadfully pale. The smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of chalk-white horror. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Twins. Not one inconvenient grieving child. Two babies. 2 permanent, unbreakable living links to the sainted dead wife. 2 heirs to the Harris legacy. 2 tiny, screaming, expensive reminders of Sarah forever. Her own pregnancy, which she had seen as her trump card, her checkmate, was suddenly a liability. She wasn't an exciting new life. She was just the other one, the one with the 3rd baby. David was no longer a grieving widower hour she could comfort and claim. He was a single father of newborn twins. Her victory, so sweet just seconds before, had turned to ash in her mouth. She backed away, stumbling, her eyes wide with panic. She had laughed, and now the universe was laughing back. The days that followed were a blur of antiseptic smells, the rhythmic beeping of NICU machinery, and a crushing, suffocating guilt. The twins, Oliver and Olivia, were impossibly small, their bodies lost in a tangle of wires and tubes inside their separate incubators. They were Sarah's. They had her delicate eyelids, her fine hair, and David, looking at them through the clear plastic, felt nothing but a profound, hollow sense of being an imposter. Sarah's funeral was a quiet, agonizing affair. Margaret Jenkins stood at the graveside, her face a stone carving of grief. She did not speak to David. She did not look at him. She simply accepted the folded flag. Sarah had been an Air Force brat and stared at the polished casket, her hatred for the man who had broken her daughter's heart, a palpable physical force. David was alone. And then he wasn't. Khloe Sanders, after her initial shock, had regrouped. She had a new strategy. She showed up at his Terry townhouse a week after the funeral, dressed in modestial black. She brought a casserole. "David," she said softly, stepping inside before he could stop her. "I know you're in pain, and I know I was shocked at the hospital. I didn't mean to react that way. It was just all so much." David, who was operating on 3 hours of sleep and pure self-loathing, just stared at her. "You laughed, Khloe." "I was hysterical." She lied her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "It was also awful. Sarah, and then twins. I broke, but I'm here now. We're in this together, David. You, me, and our baby." She placed a hand on her flat stomach. "We can raise them all together, a new family." David looked at her, at this woman who had called his dying wife a complication, and felt a revulsion so deep it almost made him gag. "Get out," he whispered. "What? David, don't be like this. I'm pregnant with your child." "Get out of my house! Get out of my life!" he roared, the first real emotion other than grief flashing through him. "You laughed when she died. You stood there and you were happy. Get out before I call the police." Khloe's face hardened. The mask was off. "You'll regret this, David. You can't just throw me away. I'm carrying your baby. I'm not going anywhere." "We'll see about that," he said, slamming the door in her face. He was trapped, a single father to 2 premature babies he barely felt connected to, and a pregnant, monstrous mistress who was threatening to ruin him. His nightmare was only just beginning. 2 weeks later, he was called into a meeting at St. David's. He assumed it was about the twins' discharge plan. But when he walked in, it wasn't just Dr. Miller. A grim-faced hospital administrator, Robert Polson, and a man in a suit, Dr. Aaron Patel, the head of hospital genetics, were also at the table. "Mr. Harris, please sit down," Polson said, his tone formal. "Is it the twins? Are they okay?" David asked, his heart seizing. "The twins are stabilizing," Dr. Miller said gently. This is about something else. David, when you and Sarah went through your IVF treatment at Austin IVF, there were multiple cycles, correct?" "Yes," David said, confused. 8 over the years. This last one was the one that worked. Dr. Patel cleared his throat and opened a file. "Mr. Harris, as part of the NICU workup for premature twins, we ran a full genetic panel just to rule out any congenital issues." He paused and looked at the administrator, who nodded. "Mr. Harris, Doctor," Patel continued, "during the course of this routine screening, we found an anomaly, a genetic discrepancy. We cross-referenced the twins' DNA with the sample you provided at admission." He took a deep breath. "David, the genetic markers show you are not the twins' biological father." The silence in the room was absolute. David just stared. "What? That's impossible. That's absurd. We did IVF. It was our embryos." "No," Dr. Miller said, her voice aching with sympathy. "It was Sarah's egg, but the sperm sample? It wasn't yours." Polson, the administrator, cut in his voice, all business. "It appears there was a catastrophic error at the fertility clinic. Austin IVF is a separate entity, but they have privileges at our hospital. We've cross-referenced their records for that day. It appears your sample was misplaced, and another patient's sample was used to fertilize Ms. Jenkins's eggs." David couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. The babies, Oliver and Olivia, the only things left of Sarah, they weren't his. His sacrifice, his betrayal, his lies, the stress that he was convinced had contributed to Sarah's death. It was all for nothing. He had destroyed his life and lost his wife for another man's children. "Who?" David finally choked out. "A couple," Dr. Miller said softly. "Mark and Jessica Bishop. They were also patients. They've been trying for 10 years. They were told their last cycle failed." David Harris began to laugh. It was a broken, horrifying sound echoing the one he'd heard in the waiting room. He was a man who had everything, and in the span of 3 weeks had been left with absolutely, cosmically nothing. The news from Dr. Patel didn't just break David Harris, it unmade him. The grief for Sarah had been a tangible, crushing weight. The guilt had been a fire searing him from the inside out. But this new knowledge, this was something else entirely. It was a vacuum. It sucked the very marrow from his bones, leaving him a hollow, weightless shell. He walked out of the administrator's office, floated down the elevator, and drove his car back to the glass house in Terrytown. He was, in the most profound and terrible way, free. He was a man with no wife, no children, and no future. He was a ghost in his own life. He walked into the house. Sarah's pays, the ones from that last awful day, were long dead, their petals a brown, papery confetti on the marble console. He walked past the living room, through his empty office, and up the stairs. He went to the sage-green nursery. 2 empty cribs stood waiting. 2 matching mobiles, little hand-knitted lambs, hung in the still air. All the love, all the hope, all the 7-year-long desperation that had been poured into this room, it was for nothing. His betrayal, his lies, the stress he was convinced had triggered Sarah's fatal decline. He had done it all. Sacrificed his wife for children who were not even his. He had burned his world to the ground to protect a family that never existed. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall between the 2 cribs. He did not cry. He was beyond tears. He sat there as the sun set, the room plunging into darkness, and he felt the man he was. David Harris, the brilliant architect, the loving husband, the fraud, finally mercifully die. A new man rose in his place, a man with nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous and most focused man in the world. This new man had only one purpose: to dismantle the past. He was an architect, after all. He had built this life. Now he would design its demolition. At 7 a.m. he called his lawyer. Stephen Carr was David's corporate attorney, a man who navigated the brutal world of Austin real estate development with the cold precision of a shark. He was used to David's frantic calls about zoning laws and permit bureaucracy. He was not prepared for this. He met David in his sterile downtown office. "David," Stephen said, his face a practiced mask of sympathy. I was so sorry to hear about Sarah. It's a tragedy. I've already started the paperwork for her estate probate." "Stop," David said. His voice was flat, dead. "That's not why I'm here." David laid out the entire story. The IVF, the HELP syndrome, the death, the twins, and finally the genetic report. Stephen Carr, a man who had seen billion-dollar deals collapse and partners backstab each other, was speechless. He took off his glasses, polished them, and looked at his client. "My God, David, Austin IVF, they are finished." "That's your first job," David said. "I want you to file a wrongful death suit. I want you to file for catastrophic malpractice. I want you to find every dollar they have and every dollar their insurance has, and I want you to take it. We're going to create a memorial fund. The Sarah Jenkins Harris Memorial Fund. It will fund HELPI syndrome research and support families destroyed by fertility clinic negligence. I want you to ruin them, Stephen. Not for me, for her. Carr nodded slowly, the shark in him smelling blood. It will be a landmark case. It will be done. Second, David continued, his eyes like chips of ice. Khloe Sanders. The Mistress, Carr said, his tone shifting to distaste. Messy. She'll have to be paid off. She's pregnant. I assume she'll claim... She is claiming. She's claiming it's mine. I don't think it is. A paternity test. Then we can... No, David interrupted. Not just a test. I want to know everything. You use my money. You hire the best private investigator in this state. I want her keycard records from the firm for the last 6 months. I want her expense reports. I want her credit card statements, her Uber receipts, her hotel stays. I want to know who she was with every single night she wasn't with me. She was hedging her bets, Stephen. I was just one of her prospects. I want to know who the other one was. Carr looked at the man in front of him. This was not the grieving widower hour. This was an executioner. This isn't just a legal strategy, David. This is a reckoning. Call it whatever you want, David said, standing up. Just get it done, and find the real parents of those children. I want to meet them. The meeting with Khloe was set for 3 days later. The investigator was fast. David had the file. It was worse and better than he could have imagined. He chose a bright, soulless Starbucks on a busy corner, a place with no memories and no shadows. She walked in, and David was struck by the audacity of her performance. She wasn't dressed in black. She was wearing a cream-colored, expensive-looking pantsuit, an outfit for a new beginning. Her hand was resting possessively on her barely there bump. She was not here to grieve with him. She was here to negotiate the terms of her new life. David, she said, her voice a soft purr of manufactured sympathy. She sat down, her expensive bag clicking on the table. I'm so glad you're finally ready to see reason. I know you're in pain. I truly do. But this, she caressed her stomach, is a blessing, a fresh start for us. I've already had my lawyer draft some preliminary paperwork, a very generous consideration for our future. David just stirred his black coffee, the scraping of the wooden stick, the only sound. Khloe leaned in, her mask of sympathy tightening. Look, I know it's hard to see it now, but this is what Sarah would have wanted, for you to be happy. We can sell that mausoleum of a house. Find a gorgeous penthouse downtown. Just you, me, and our baby, our real family. David looked up. His eyes were so empty, so devoid of light that Khloe's smile faltered for a second. The twins aren't mine, Khloe. Her face froze. What? David, don't be cruel. Just because they're complications doesn't mean you can just... They're not my children. He repeated, his voice a monotone. There was a mix-up at the IVF clinic. A genetic test confirmed it. They belong to another man, another couple. I'm not their father. Khloe stared at him. She processed the information. Disbelief, confusion, and then the most profound, sickening relief. It started as a snort, a disbelieving puff of air, then her shoulders started to shake. She covered her mouth, but it was no use. A high, ringing laugh burst out of her. People at other tables turned to look. "Oh my God!" she gasped, tears of actual mirth streaming from her eyes. She put her head down on the table, her body convulsing with laughter. "You're serious? Oh, David, that is priceless." She sat up, wiping her eyes, her face flushed with victory. You went through all that. You lost everything, for nothing, for someone else's brats. Oh my God, you really are the most pathetic fool I have ever met. She collected herself, taking a deep, shuddering breath. Her eyes were shining now, all traces of false sympathy gone, replaced by pure, predatory triumph. "Well," she said, straightening her jacket. "Wow, okay, that just makes things so much cleaner, doesn't it? All that baggage, poof, gone. It's just you, me, and this." She patted her stomach, her smile wide and genuine for the first time. "Our baby, our heir, the real Harris legacy." David just watched her, his expression unchanged. "You're right. It does make things cleaner." He slid a thick manila file across the table. Khloe's smile flickered. "What's that? The paperwork my lawyer sent?" "No," David said. "It's from my lawyer's investigator." She opened it. Her smile vanished. Inside were photographs, her kissing Alex Vance, a senior partner at the firm in the parking garage of the W Hotel. Hotel receipts expensed to the firm for nights she had told David she was working late. Credit card statements showing dinners at Uchi with Vance. "I was a fool," David said, his voice quiet, surgical. "I was so wrapped up in my own lies I couldn't see yours. You weren't in love with me, Khloe. You were just auditioning, seeing which partner at the firm would bite first. I was just plan A. How's plan B?" He slid a second document on top of the file. "The court order." I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her face turning a chalky white. "That's a court order for a prenatal paternity test," David said. "It names both me and Alex Vance as potential fathers. My lawyer, Stephen Carr, is very thorough. He sent a copy to Alex's lawyer and to Alex's wife about an hour ago." Khloe's world imploded. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but only a small choking sound came out. This was a reckoning she had never anticipated. She had overplayed her hand, and now she had lost everything. "You laughed when my wife died," David said, standing up from the table. "You laughed when you found out my children weren't mine. Laugh now, Khloe." He left her there, a statue of her own ambition, the file open in front of her as the other patrons of the Starbucks watched her silent, frantic, and complete collapse. The paternity test a few weeks later confirmed it. The baby was Alex Vance's. Vance, in a desperate bid to save his own marriage and career, promptly denied everything, fired Khloe for gross professional misconduct, and had his wife's lawyer serve her with a cease and desist order. Khloe Sanders, who had gambled on landing a rich husband, was left pregnant, unemployed, and utterly alone, a pariah in the city she had tried to conquer. 2 days later, Dr. Miller facilitated the hardest meeting of David's life. Mark and Jessica Bishop looked like they had been hollowed out by a decade of grief. They were kind, gentle people from a small town outside Austin, and they looked at David with a terrifying, unreadable combination of pity, gratitude, and sorrow. "Mr. Harris," Jessica whispered, her hands knotted together. We don't know what to say. We are so sorry for your loss, for your wife, Sarah." David just knotted his throat too tight to speak. Dr. Miller led them all to the NICU. Nurse Brenda, her eyes soft with sympathy, was waiting. David stood back as Mark and Jessica approached the 2 incubators. Mark pressed his hand to the plastic of Oliver's isolate. He has my father's ears." He choked out tears, instantly flooding his eyes. Jessica just stared at Olivia, her entire body shaking, a sound of pure, unadulterated awe escaping her. "She's real. Oh, Mark, after all this time, she's real." David watched them. He watched this pure, untainted love pour out of them. This was the first good, the first right thing that had happened since that last perfect Sunday. This was the family Oliver and Olivia were meant to have. We want to honor Sarah," Mark said, turning to David, his face a mess of tears and joy. We'd like Olivia's middle name to be Sarah, If that's okay with you." The dam broke. The first real tears of a grief so profound he hadn't been able to touch it, stung David's eyes. He nodded. Yes, she would. She would have liked that. He watched Nurse Brenda help Jessica hold her daughter for the first time. He watched Mark put a single finger into Oliver's tiny hand and watched the baby grip it. He was the outsider. He was the ghost. His role in this story was over. He turned unseen and walked out of the NICU, leaving the bishops to their miracle. The dismantling was swift. The lawsuit against Austin IVF settled for a staggering sum, bankrupting the clinic and making national news. The Sarah Jenkins Harris Memorial Fund was established the next day. David sold the glass house in Terrytown. He sold his partnership at the firm. He liquidated every stock, every bond, every last trace of his old life. His last stop was Margaret Jenkins's house. She opened the door. She had aged a decade. The Texas granite of her face was cracked, revealing a raw, bottomless grief. "Margaret," he said. He was holding a single cashier's check. She just stared at him, her eyes burning with a cold, pure hatred. "It's everything," he whispered, his voice breaking. "The house, the firm, the stocks. It's all I have left. It's for her, for you." He held it out. She looked at the check, then back at him. "Do you think this brings her back?" She hissed, her voice like gravel. "No, nothing does." "She loved you," Margaret said, and the words were a final damning verdict. "She knew. She told me the week before. She knew you were cheating and she was going to stay for the baby. Your lies, the stress, you and that. You did this. The doctors can call it HELP syndrome. I call it murder." David stood there and took it. He had no defense. "I know." She snatched the check from his hand. "Good. I hope you live 1,000 years, David, and I hope you remember her face and what you did to her, every single second of it." She slammed the door in his face. He was done. David Harris walked away. He got into an old used pickup truck he'd bought with the last of his cash. He had one bag in the passenger seat. He drove out of Austin, past the skyline he had helped to build. He didn't look back. He drove west into the vast, empty heart of Texas until the city was just a smear of light in his rear-view mirror. He stopped at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, a wind whipping dust across the road. He looked at his reflection in the dirty bathroom mirror. The man looking back was a stranger, gaunt, haunted, empty. The architect was gone. The husband was gone. The father was gone. All that was left was the ghost. He got back in the truck, pointed it toward the setting sun, and drove into the darkness. A man with no name, no past, and no future. Just the long, empty road. In the end, there were no winners. There was only the devastating wreckage of choices made in secret. David lost his wife, his children, and his entire identity. Khloe, who laughed at another's tragedy, found herself the star of her own, abandoned and ruined by the very ambition that drove her. But 2 lives, Oliver and Olivia, were saved from the rubble. They are to this day being raised by a loving, grateful family who never gave up hope. This story is a brutal reminder that a lie can't just build a new future. It can only annihilate the present. The truth, no matter how delayed, always finds its way to the surface. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story of twists and consequences, and subscribe to the channel for more true life drama every week. Let me know in the comments what you think. Was David's final act a form of redemption, or was it simply the last act of a coward? We'll see you in the next.